This presentation is about how to begin the process of writing a phenomenological research dissertation. Basically, what you want to know before you begin. And I think a lot of students that begin this dissertation process and want to do phenomenological research um, get confused on some basic principles that I want to mention here. And I think after this short presentation, you'll be off to the races and capable of beginning this process and being able to sort of wrap your head around exactly what you need to know to begin. So this is very short, brief presentation and very simple presentation. Continue to work with your chair and your committee members throughout this process, but I believe this will get you off to a pretty good start. So phenomenology, it's important to know what that is. A lot of people want to do the phenomenological research and they want to do it about experience, and it sounds easy enough and it's intriguing enough, but there's a philosophical baseline under phenomenological research, which is the philosophy, phenomenology. And what phenomenology is basically the essence of something as it's described, how it functions in the living space, in the lived experience, how it shows itself in consciousness as an object of something that we reflect. So how we see something as lived. That's phenomenology. So what is the essence of something? That's what phenomenology wants to uncover. And when you're doing phenomenological research, all of the research questions need to be about experience. So you don't want a research question on how your participants might view something or might have an opinion about something. Everything is about experience, how they experience their world, how they experience the phenomenon that you want to uncover. So if you're looking at counselors who have worked in rural areas, you want to look at the experience of counselors working in rural areas. That would be your research question. What is the lived experience of counselors working with clients in rural areas, as opposed to something like, what do counselors think about the challenges of working in rural areas? That would not be a phenomenological question. Another big confusing piece for students is theoretical framework. So this is most important whenever you begin this process of dissertation. So you need to have a theoretical framework, and a lot of people want to use various really interesting theoretical frameworks because they fit with their topic. So that could be, I really want to use a feminist framework, or I really want to use a developmental framework. But when you do phenomenological work, in that research, you have to have a phenomenological framework. There are no exceptions. And in short, there are two main options that you have. You have Husserl and Heidegger. Husserl, if you're framing your phenomenological dissertation with Husserlian philosophy, your phenomenological research would be transcendental. And if you are framing your framework or your research with Heidegger, it would be a hermeneutic phenomenological research dissertation. So I will go into more depth through this presentation about the two different frameworks, as that's really the big bulk of what students get confused about in the beginning. And if you do want to add, say, a feminist framework into your dissertation, you are able to do that, but only with Heidegger. So if you want to use a Husserlian framework, you're not able to do that. His philosophy does not allow for that, and that's going to become clear throughout this presentation. So just sort of bear that in mind when you're choosing your framework. And if you do choose an additional framework, say Heidegger and feminist theory, you would have sort of a hermeneutic feminist phenomenological research dissertation. So it would be not a pure hermeneutic phenomenological dissertation, but that's okay. So you would sort of have a hybrid of that using an additional framework. And a lot of people do that, and there's a lot of phenomenological research that has hybrid qualities because of additional frameworks that are used. So let's go to Husserl. So who is he? Why do I want to use him? What's Husserl's story? So this is your option one. And remember, with Husserl, there is no additional framework that you can use. So Husserl, in graphics, his philosophy looks like this. And I'm going to go over all of these terms here. There's intentionality, there's noesis, noema, there's the phenomena, which is plural for phenomenon, and then there's the horizon. So this is a really great illustration you can sort of pull up after I go through these terms. But let me discuss what Husserl is about and if this is something that might fit for you and how you understand phenomenon. So Husserl, who is the father of phenomenology, he created it. He wanted to get to the pure essence of experience, of the way that you look at something, the phenomenon. And intentionality is that fundamental property of consciousness, of looking at something. It's in essence, it's our awareness. So when Husserl talks about intentionality, it's basically our awareness of something. So, and this is the principal theme within Husserl's philosophy, is intentionality. Phenomenological reduction is also a term that Husserl uses, and it's basically the intentional consciousness using the process of bracketing. I'm sure you've probably heard bracketing if you've done a little bit of research on phenomenology, or epoche. Yes, that's how you pronounce it, epoche. The same thing. So what that means in essence within reduction of using, reduction means bracketing or using epoche or using bracketing, is suspending your judgments to focus on what you're analyzing, what you're looking at, the phenomenon that you're looking at. And this is really important. So it's not about eliminating your biases or your judgments or your pre-understandings. It's about suspending them. It's about setting them aside in a sense. And I'm going to talk about, well, how do you do that? Is that something that you can do? Noema and noesis are the two other terms that Husserl uses. And noesis means to think about or interpret. And noesis is to think about or interpret. And noema is the thing that is thought about. Okay, and so those two sort of go hand in hand. And the horizon is this present experience that you have right now. So right now you're watching this PowerPoint presentation. You're having this experience in the present. And this present experience that you're having can't be bracketed because you're in it. And also, everything has a horizon. When we look at any phenomenon, there's also always this present experience. And so Husserl believed that nothing really could be fully seen in its entirety, unless you were omniscient, all-knowing, and of course no human being is. And so when we look at something, when we analyze something, even though we suspend our judgments and set them aside and to really try to get the pure essence of something, that we come to the horizon, and the horizon is this understanding that we have. And so this is, again, the graph that is a really great diagram of Husserl's phenomenology. And so noesis, again, is looking at something. Noema is that which is being looked at, and sort of this circle within the end of the light for the flashlight is the horizon. The flashlight would be you, the researcher. And intentionality is this process that Husserl talks about. So that is really his phenomenology. And I want to talk about bracketing a little bit because this is where Husserl and Heidegger differ greatly. So The way that I like to understand bracketing or epoche, this phenomenological reduction that you'll do of trying to really get at the essence of something, of an experience, is having this position as a researcher of being the stranger in a strange land, right? It's sort of like Marvin the Martian looking down his telescope and looking at all these people doing things in the world and not understanding what people are or what environment is or what anything on planet Earth is. And so these biases that this Martian has, or these pre-understandings that this Martian has, are sort of already suspended because the suspension is sort of putting yourself in this state of being a stranger in a strange land. So what if I didn't understand, say, what what a counselor is, or what the process of a counselor is? What if I didn't understand what a rural area is and any of those challenges within a rural area? So if somebody is saying something or using a certain term, I might need to clarify that because I can't assume that I understand. So sort of being in this sort of meditative state of being the stranger in a strange land, of putting yourself in that position. That's really how I understand bracketing and suspending your biases as a researcher. And that's how you can get a true essence of something, or the pure essence of something, because you are intentionally suspending any of these pre-understandings that you have, in order to look at something as clearly and as objectively as you can. So in a nutshell, that's Husserl, and that is transcendental phenomenology. And so if you want to use Husserl's framework, of course, that would be the only framework that you could use. And you can sort of see why you can't use another framework, because if you're suspending all your judgments, if you're suspending all other understanding, then you'd have to suspend an additional framework. You really couldn't have an additional framework to look through, because then you wouldn't be getting at the essence of the pure essence of something. So Husserl really doesn't allow, his philosophy doesn't allow for an additional framework to be used. So let's go to Heidegger. Heidegger was a student of Husserl, and he differed on essentially bracketing was the big piece that he differed from Husserl, and he branched off and created his own phenomenology, which is hermeneutic phenomenology. And he really believed that there was no way that we could bracket our experiences, our biases, our understandings. It just wasn't possible, even if we tried, because we're always in the world with others, in the circumstances of existence. And there is no way to separate yourself from being within the world and everything that you're in. And this state, this being in the world, essentially means Dasein. It's being there is the German word for it. So you'll see that a lot in Heidegger's text. And Dasein is what he talks about when he talks about self, myself, yourself, someone else's self. So each person is Dasein. Each person is being there. Each person is within the circumstances of their existence. And this problem of not being able to bracket, not being able to suspend judgment. So how do you understand phenomenon? How can you get to an essence of something? How can you understand something if you're not able to look at it in an objective way, if you're not able to sort of suspend all of your interpretations and judgments and be able to look at something? And what Heidegger talked about is the hermeneutic circle. He talked about it in terms of a revisionary process. And so as we interpret something, as we start to understand and interpret something, our biases, our understandings, our judgments are revised as we get new information. And this hermeneutic circle, I want to really make clear that this is a description of understanding, of interpretation. This is not a technique that you use. And so this is the philosophy, is the hermeneutic circle of what is understanding, what is interpretation. This is how Heidegger's philosophy encompassed how people understand, how people interpret, how people make sense of the world through this hermeneutic circle. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. So this is a graph of the hermeneutic circle, and there's an understanding of the whole, and then there's analyzing that, and there's analyzing this whole and taking it in parts. So as you're analyzing data, as you're analyzing and putting things into themes, these break about into parts, and then they synthesize, and you look at the whole again. You look at, say, the entire transcript again, and that's a new understanding. And then through that analysis again, the parts make sense of the whole, and the whole makes sense of the parts. And so this circle continues on and on. So it's not a linear process, but a circular process, obviously, in the hermeneutic circle. And this is how Heidegger understood interpretation. This is how people make sense of the phenomenon in the world. He believed that interpretation is a constant revision. So as I'm interpreting something, I have a pre-understanding of that phenomenon. And as I interpret it, as I sort of read this transcript of somebody's experience, there's a revision of my judgment, of my bias, of my understanding as I'm getting new information. And I revise that understanding, and the whole text is grasped in individual parts and also as a whole. So researcher revises his or her understanding of the whole text, of the whole transcript, as I grasp the individual parts of the text. And so it sort of goes on and on and on. And as I look at little pieces, I sort of get these aha moments. So you can sort of think of sometimes you have an experience in your life, and you may understand certain parts of it, and then think about maybe 3 years later you have some experiences, and then you can kind of look back on something that happened 3 years ago and say, oh, now I understand what this person was telling me. And so this is sort of an example of a sort of long hermeneutic circle of experience of the whole, as you have developed as a person, that whole of you as a person, that whole experience of you as a person now looks back at the individual parts, maybe 3 years ago, something somebody might have told you, and now you grasp a new understanding. So this is how the whole has a impact on the individual parts, and then the individual parts make sense of the whole. And so that's how Heidegger understood this revision and understanding phenomenon. So revisions of understandings happen as the whole meaning emerges. So there's always this movement from the object trying to be understood to the personal understanding of the researcher, and then back to the object. And so hopefully that makes sense for you, as far as sort of somebody tells you something, and then you have some experiences, and then it might make sense down the road in your life. I think all of us have had those experiences through life as we've gotten older. So I think of Heidegger's understanding, his hermeneutic circle, as lenses. So how I understand Husserl as a stranger in a strange land, sort of how to do this bracketing. So how do you do this hermeneutic circle? I think of it in terms of lenses. So you, in your technique of the hermeneutic circle, is that you want to make your personal biases explicit. So what are your biases? What are your judgments? You can do that by writing those in your dissertation, or by writing them beforehand. I think also as you write throughout the process, and sort of why did you interpret one thing over another. So say you have a personal experience as being from a rural area, and someone maybe uses a term and you know exactly what they mean, not because everybody would know what they mean, but because you are from that rural area or from a rural area, and you sort of get certain things that other people might not get. And so you might want to journal within your data analysis of, I understand this context, or understand what this participant was saying because of my experience of living in a rural area. Whereas Husserl would really go back to the participant and say, what did you exactly mean by this? Even though there might be a personal understanding of that, Husserl wouldn't take that for granted, because you're looking at being a stranger in a strange land, where Heidegger says, you have these pre-understandings of being a certain, living in a certain area, being of a certain race, being of a certain gender, having a certain experiences. And so the sort of different way of analyzing the data in that way. And so you can kind of see too how you make your personal biases and your judgments explicit in Heidegger's case through the hermeneutic circle, but in the bracketing process, that's really not necessary, because all of your biases, your understandings, your judgments are irrelevant when you're looking at the data. And so why would you make those explicit and put them in front of you if you're trying to suspend them, right? And so a lot of people will say, I'm going to journal about my biases, but they're using transcendental phenomenology, which is Husserlian philosophy, and so that sort of doesn't fit with bracketing, because judgments are irrelevant in that sense. So lenses, let's go back to this. Gadamer, who wrote Truth and Method, really elaborated on the hermeneutic circle quite well. He was a philosopher, and he took Heidegger's concepts of the hermeneutic circle, and really elaborated on them very, very well. And so if you are doing a Heideggerian philosophical framework, I would really advise you to get Gadamer's Truth and Method, because his text is almost essential in being able to understand the hermeneutic circle in more depth, as opposed to Heidegger's Poetry, Language, Thought text, which talks about the hermeneutic circle, but doesn't take on the depth that Gadamer takes it. So these lenses that I'm talking about are these pre-understandings. So you kind of sort of come in with certain biases and judgments. Gadamer calls them foreconceptions, pre-understandings. And you modify the nature of understanding and interpretation by this constant process of interpretation, or renewed projection, Gadamer calls it. And this happens through each lens, through looking through your biases, through looking through your understandings, through looking through, instead of trying to suspend them. And so now you can kind of see that this would be your position as the researcher, of these lenses that you're looking through in order to get at the phenomenon at the end. So it's constantly, these lenses are constantly changed, and each lens is created as you sort of go through the process of interpretation. And so now you can see how this can allow for another theoretical framework. And so if you're using attachment theory, for instance, so pre-understanding would be one lens, attachment theory would be another lens. You'd have a new meaning that emerges from that, and so on in this hermeneutic circle through these lenses they would be created. And that's in essence the hermeneutic circle, and sort of how to do that. So those are the two philosophers that you would be using. And I want to show you an example of what this would look like in research. So I want to talk about a very simple phenomenological question, try to get the essence of something. We'll go through Husserl, and then we'll go through Heidegger, and we will hopefully emerge at the end of it with an understanding of what Heidegger and Husserl sort of look like in phenomenological research. So let's do Husserl first. So we want to understand the essence of cat. So what is the essence of cat, right? We're going to do a transcendental phenomenological study, which is Husserlian philosophy. And when we get our first participant, we're going to have a few cats that we look at and look at sort of their essence. We want to look at George. So George is my cat. He's one of the few cats that we have. We have 3 cats. And George was a rescue of ours when we lived in the city. He was pretty emaciated and dirty and full of fleas and malnourished. He's also declawed. He's orange. He was super thin and wasn't doing so well when we found him. And so, say this is your first participant. You meet George the cat, and remember that you're a stranger in a strange land. So you've never seen a cat. You don't know what a cat is. You're not assuming. You don't have any assumptions or pre-understandings about cat. And if this is your first participant within a transcendental phenomenological research study, your first set of data would be perhaps cat is. Cat has pointed ears, cat is orange, cat is furry, cat has back claws, cat has no front claws, cat is malnourished, cat has a long tail, and cat is a hunter. Okay, so you saw George going after bugs and mice, which he does. So this is the essence so far we have of cat. And we're strangers in strange lands, and so this is where we take nothing for granted. So we want to get another participant, because remember, it's about being getting all of your participants, and it's not about the number, but it's about saturation. So we want to get saturated, and so we look at participant 2, and this is this cute little gray cat that we see. And he's a little different from George, and so we want to probably revise our data since we're interpreting. So what is cat? Well, this cat's gray, and this cat's got claws actually, and this cat's kind of chunky, little fat little guy. And this cat is or at least well fed. And he's also a hunter, and so let's look at how our data changes. So now cat is pointed ears. Cat isn't orange because we found a gray cat, and so maybe cat, I don't know, maybe there's orange and gray cats, and maybe that's all there is. We just don't know. So we'll take that out. Both of them are furry. Both of them have back claws. I don't know if all cats have front claws. This one did, but we're going to take that out too. Long tail. They both had long tails, and they're both hunters. So this is the data that we have now. Okay, all right, well, let's get more participants and see if we can reach saturation. So, get more participants. Look at our participants 3, 4, and 5. We have this nice striped cat. We have this Sphinx cat with no hair. Well, that's different. That was in some of our data, so that changes. And then we have this Manx cat with without a long tail, just like this little nub. So that's different too. So now our data is going to definitely change. And so when we look at what is cat, this is our final data. Cat has pointed ears, back claws. All of the cats were hunters, so we can keep that in. Out of the 5 cats, only 1 had missing front claws, so we're going to put in the cats have front claws. We think that maybe something happened with George that he didn't have front claws. And also there are many breeds, many colors. And so this is the data simplistically, you probably need more cats to really get saturated, but since we probably know enough about cats, we can use 5 for this example. So this is the data that we have from a transcendental phenomenological research study. So let's look at Heidegger. Let's do a hermeneutic research study. And what would our research and our analysis look like? Would it be different? Yes, it would be. So we're again going to look at what is the essence of cat. And we are going to use the hermeneutic circle for this endeavor. So we do have a pre-understanding of cat. Most of us, or all of us, in this PowerPoint presentation that are listening probably have a pre-understanding of cat. For the purposes of this example, I'm going to use a dictionary example. And so the way that our this pre-understanding is it's a small domesticated carnivorous mammal with soft fur, a short snout, a retractable claws. It's widely kept as a pet for catching mice. Many breeds have been developed. Okay, so from this pre-understanding, we know they have soft fur, front and black claws. It's a hunter, and then there's many breeds. And now let's look at our participants. So we have, again, our same set of participants. And we are going to look at George again. So remember George from our first study. So malnourished, not doing so great. He doesn't have any front claws, big orange cat. But we also have a pre-understanding, right? And so we have something to go off of. So as we meet George, we've already changed the data a bit from our pre-understanding, and now we're going to look through the lens of our pre-understanding and revise the data now coming with George. And with George now, just looking at George, George is malnourished. George also has pointed ears. But we do know that most cats aren't malnourished, and so we sort of put that data in there, but in blue. But from our pre-understanding, we kind of have seen other cats that are not malnourished. So we'll suspend that a little bit, sort of knowing our pre-understanding, but maybe most of the cats that we meet will be malnourished. We're not sure. So long tail, soft fur. George had that. Front claws. Well, that's different. George doesn't have front claws, but my pre-understanding is that cats have front and back claws. So that's different. This cat is a hunter, and we also know that there are many breeds, and he happens to be an orange one, so we're going to keep that pre-understanding. So this is the first data set that we have from our pre-understanding of meeting our first participant. And now we're going to meet participants 2, 3, 4, and 5, so the same cats that we met in the Husserlian philosophical groundwork that we had in the transcendental phenomenological study of the gray cat, the striped cat, the hairless cat, and the tailless cat. And from analyzing these participants, our data now changes. So all of them have pointy ears. Only George was malnourished, and so we were kind of actually pretty right on that. We didn't think, but we weren't sure, so we wanted to suspend that a little bit, and then we looked at it and said, oh yeah, okay, pre-understanding. None of them are malnourished except George. Long tail, well, we found out from the participants that not all of them have long tails. So say we might have participated and had, maybe we were looking at the essence of cat and had 6 manxes within our participant pool to reach saturation. Soft fur, well, that's not true either because we met this hairless cat, and so that's out. Maybe we met a lot of hairless cats in our quest for saturation. Front claws, back claws, yes, they all had that. They're all hunters, and there were many breeds. And so that's the data we came out with the hermeneutic phenomenological study. And so how did we do with the data? So let's look at these. And as you can see, the data that you come out with is the same. Now, does that always happen? No, but usually you do come out with pretty true similar data using either study. So it's just a matter of how you analyze the data, how you're looking at the data, and not whether one is right or one is wrong. So essentially you should have pretty good essence of your phenomenon using either study. And here we were able to do that with the cats. So hopefully you gained a better understanding of how to do data analysis using Heidegger Husserl's philosophy. And so in essence, that's really what you need to know to start your phenomenological dissertation, of course, working with your chair and your committee members to guide you and continue that process. This, by the way, is George. He's still around. He's alive and well, and he's our fat little cat now. He's a very great cat. So in case you're wondering about him, he's still around. Here's some references that I used just in this presentation, and there are a lot of other references that you can use and should use to accompany your phenomenological dissertation work. I hope this has been helpful. Feel free to ask any questions, and onward and upward. I wish you all the best on your dissertation.